Move on to a Zoom submission that we have with the Human Rights Commission. We have, I think, Professor Gail and Oliver joining us, hopefully. Wonderful. Oh, wonderful. Welcome, Gail.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. And Oliver.
Morena koutou.
We have 10 minutes with you this morning. Thank you very much for making yourselves available for us. Over to you. That 10 minutes does include time for questions, so I'll leave that to you as to how you manage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So kia ora everyone and good morning. My name is Gail Pacheco and I'm the Equal Employment Opportunities Commissioner at Te Kahui Tika Tangata, the Human Rights Commission. I just wanted to highlight also that in addition to this role, the expertise that I draw on today includes my prior experience as a productivity commissioner at the New Zealand Productivity Commission, as well as more than 2 decades as an academic in my prior roles as a professor of economics and director of the New Zealand Policy Research Institute. With me here today is Oliver, who's Senior Human Rights Advisor, Equal Employment Opportunities. As set out in our written submission, our role as the National Human Rights Institution is to advocate and promote in New Zealand respect for and understanding and appreciation of human rights and the human rights dimensions of Te Titiri. In my commissioner role, I'm responsible for leading the Commission's work on equal employment opportunities, including pay equity. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with the committee today and expand a little bit on the submission. Overall, the Commission supports the bill. It's an important piece of legislation and will meaningfully promote and advance human rights. And this includes the right to freedom of expression and the commitment to equity in Article 3 of Te Tiriti. Importantly, it also acts to build trust and supports open dialogue in parties to employment relationships. We know that pay transparency makes a difference. As Joe just recently pointed out, international evidence is overwhelming from Canada, from the UK, from Denmark. They all show that pay transparency policies help close pay gaps. And what I really take from these studies also is they all took a causal approach. So they had quasi-experimental frameworks, which indicates how robust the findings are and that they aren't just correlations or associations. It's also the case that supporting pay transparency supports a flexible and dynamic labour market, and that provides good access for information for people to make quality decisions about employment. And the bill also reflects recommendations we've received internationally to progress our human rights obligations in the labour market. In terms of previous work the Commission has done, we've been advocating for pay transparency, including ending pay secrecy clauses since 2019. And we've undertaken research involving employers, workers, unions, met with politicians across the political spectrum, and we've consistently heard that people want to close gender and ethnic pay gaps, and they support concrete actions to achieve this. We did the 2022 Pacific Pay Gap Inquiry, which demonstrated significant pay gaps for Māori, Pacific, and Asians, and larger pay gaps for women. And I recently led some research last year using the Household Labour Force survey, which found ethnic pay gaps were 14% for Māori to European, 10% for Asian to European, and close to 19% for Pacific to European. With higher gaps for women in relative to European men. And those higher gaps were 23, 18, and 24%. And there's a couple of things I wanted to point out in that research. One that I was just quoting those numbers from. One, we did it at the aggregate population level, but we also did it across industries, and no industry was really immune from having these pay gaps. It wasn't in particular sectors of the society. It was across all sectors and all industries. The second thing in that analysis is we were able to separate gaps into what could be explained by differences in demographic, educational, household, regional, job-related characteristics, and what was left unexplained, and the unexplained component was always substantial. So it was over 20% for Māori, over 60% for Pacific, and it was the entirety of the pay gap for Asians and women. And it's likely that both conscious and unconscious bias contribute to the unexplained components, thus giving us kind of evidence that signals the undervaluing of women and ethnic minorities. And I mentioned this research because the quantification of the evidence regarding pay gaps helps dispel myths regarding why they exist, that there's differences in education or that there's differences in the demographic structure of the workforce. But this research accounted for all of those differences and characteristics, and the unexplained component persisted. And pay secrecy is one of the barriers that can help rectify these gender and ethnic pay gaps. So this bill is a real step forward in removing those gaps and upholding human rights. It's also a really practical and simple step with low compliance costs, which appeals from an economist's point of view. The other thing I wanted to highlight is throughout the Commission's engagement with businesses, unions, we found strong public support. We ran a survey. 2 out of every 3 New Zealanders considered pay gaps to be a significant issue or very significant issue. And when we polled support for pay transparency policies, more than half the people who were either, whether they were ACT voters, National voters, Labour voters, or Green voters, all said they supported pay transparency policies. Our country is rightly proud of our history in upholding human rights. Famously, we were the first country to give women the right to vote, and this bill is another step in our history of standing up for gender and ethnic equality of opportunity. This bill also demonstrates our willingness to listen and take actions as recommended by global human rights bodies. Last year, New Zealand undertook its Universal Periodic Review, and this is the 5-yearly review by the United Nations. Where our human rights record is considered by other countries. And one of the themes that came through in our 2024 review was that we needed to introduce pay transparency initiatives to reduce gender and ethnic pay gaps. Recommendations on this theme were made by a number of countries, including the United Kingdom, Germany, Ireland, and the Netherlands, to name a few. Lastly, last year, we were also reviewed by the committee of experts that monitors implementation of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And they recommended that the country effectively enforce the principle of equal pay for equal work of equal value in order to narrow and eventually close the gender pay gap. So this bill will make a contribution to realizing those equal employment opportunities for everyone working in New Zealand. And I thank you for your attention this morning, and I'm very happy to hear any questions you may have.
Thank you. We do have a few, Gail, so appreciate what you've said so far. So we've got Camilla Balich first, Tiano, and then Grant if we have time. Camilla.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your thoughtful submission and for all the work that you've done as the Human Rights Commission in this particular area. And I want to also acknowledge your predecessor, Dr. Sunua Mali'i Karanina Sumeo, for her huge amount of work, especially with the Pacific Pay Gap Inquiry as well. And it's great to see you continuing that work, important work, Gail. So thank you very much for that. I did have a question around the Pacific Pay Gap Inquiry, and I know that you've raised a few examples from that. That is a particularly important piece of work, I think, in relation to this bill, due to the evidence that it put forward around the impact of people having secret or kind of not really having transparency within their pay in the Pacific community, or as you said, it covered a number of different communities. So I just wondered if you or Oliver could expand a little bit on the people who participated in that inquiry and some of the evidence that you got about why this type of change would be important to them.
So I was also, even though I was not at the Human Rights Commission at that time, I did all the empirical work because I was involved through my role as director of the New Zealand Policy Research Institute. So we did all the empirical work for that inquiry in terms of analyzing the pay gaps. And there was clear evidence, not just for, we did it for Pacific, but we also did it for Māori and Asian, and it's across the board. So while we talk about the Pacific Pay Gap Inquiry, it's across a number of ethnic groups where there were large gaps and where the gaps were unexplained by differences in their education or differences in their occupational category and things like that. and Oliver can speak to it as well, but in addition to the empirical work we did, which quantified the gaps and quantified that they were unexplained as well, Oliver was involved in qualitative work, which went out and talked to various communities and found qualitative evidence of those unexplained gaps in terms of unconscious bias and as well. Do you want to add anything, Oliver?
Just to speak to some of those qualitative components, Dr. Sumio herself, I think, publicly came out and talked about her own experience. And so she was in a senior role and found out, I think the figure was, don't quote me on it, was about $40,000, finding out the difference in salary that she was being paid to someone she considered herself to be, comparable in work. And we've heard these stories across when we went out and spoke with Pacific workers. And those sort of things, not only obviously big financial impacts, but also the impacts on people's mana and how they feel about themselves, and the impacts on the relationship and the actual workspaces. And I think the difference over a lifetime for a Pacific worker vis-a-vis a Pākehā worker was approximately $400,000 or $420,000. So this is about money for whole communities and contribute significantly to society and equity.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for any further questions. Tiano, I'll put you up first for the next one, okay? It's your second time running. Thank you so much for making yourselves available to us today for your submission. We very much appreciate it.